two articles that I'm going to discuss. The first article is related to COVID-19 and pregnant women in Egypt and Israel. In ectopic pregnancy, or EP, there is an implantation outside of the uterus. The majority of these pregnancies occur in the fallopian tubes. This article discusses that due to COVID-19, there was an increase in EP. This increase in EP came from women not getting the necessary medical attention or regular checkups to diagnose the EP. If EP is not diagnosed early enough, it can lead to maternal death and other negative side effects. The article discusses a study that includes a control group and a study group. The control group is composed of 30 individual women who received medical attention for their EP during the months of March and June of 2018 and 2019. The study group is composed of 19 women who also experienced an EP during the months of March and June of 2020 during the pandemic. These women had the same methods of impregnation, same age group, and generally the same variables. Out of the study group, 11 of the EP ruptured, while 8 did not. In the control group, there were 5 ruptured EP, while 25 did not. With these statistics, it can be seen that there was an increase of ruptured EP pregnancies during COVID-19. During the ongoing pandemic, there are less people coming in and out of the hospital and using emergency services. This is caused by women being less likely to seek healthcare during a political or health crisis. During the ongoing pandemic, there are less people coming in and out of the hospital and using emergency services. This is caused by women being less likely to seek healthcare during a political or health crisis. The next article that I'm going to discuss is based around an infographic poll. This poll was created by the Egyptian Center for Public Opinion Research, Basira. The purpose of this survey was to understand the effects of COVID-19 on the lives of Egyptian women. This survey was conducted via landlines and mobile phones. The poll was conducted on 1,518 women aged 18 and older. This poll was conducted from April 4th to April 14th of 2020. The majority of these women resided in rural areas, were between the ages of 30 and 49, and received less than an intermediate education. This can conclude that the majority of these women would be caregivers for their children in the household. The first section of the infographic that I'm going to discuss is, to what extent are you worried that? In this section, you can see that 71% of women were very concerned that one of their family members that they lived with would contract the coronavirus. 56% of these women fear that they would have contracted the coronavirus from going in and out of the household in order to retrieve necessities for their survival during the time. 61% of the women believe that their annual household income would decrease due to unemployment or reduced hours because of the pandemic. 41% of the women were very concerned that their husbands would be the one to bring in the virus into the household due to their carelessness or negligence. And 67% of the women believed that 67% of the women believed that the head of the household would lose their jobs due to the prevalence of the virus. The scenario that had the highest percentage of most concerned women was that the family member would catch the virus. The women feared that they would lose their annual household income due to being unemployed. Due to the pandemic, many of the employees would fall victim to unemployment and the economies had to shut down. These women had to take on roles of healthcare givers in their households to protect their family. 72% of the women stated that they experienced a decrease of income. 26% of the women stated it stayed the same, and 1% of the women were unsure. The next section of the infographic is in relation to domestic abuse in the household of married women. The statistics show an increase in domestic abuse while living amongst the virus. The majority of this abuse was verbal, followed by being hit, then pushed. Of the women who were surveyed, 11% of them experienced violence from their significant other, while 89% of women did not. Of the 11% of women who experienced violence, 4% of these women had previously experienced violence in their household, while for 7% of women, the domestic abuse had resulted due to the virus. In conclusion, due to the pandemic and the prevalence of the virus, the majority of these women had experienced a decrease in their annual income due to loss of hours or work. The head of their household may have been laid off as well, causing only one income or having no income. In addition, we can see there is an increase of domestic abuse from their significant others due to the pandemic. This increase in domestic abuse has come from women and men being in the household with each other for long periods of time and verbally abusing their significant others due to the pandemic and significant stress. On a scale from 0 to 10, when the women were asked how their lives had been affected by the coronavirus, 0 being barely affected and 10 being extremely affected, the average response was 6.71 out of 10.
COVID-19 has also brought about struggles for the women of Egypt. With the economic decline that companies are facing, there is an increased amount in the number of women who are being forced to participate in unpaid labor. Not only do these women work without pay, they are also the first to lose their jobs, which confines them to their households, in which some are faced with violence due to being confined with their abusers, as previously mentioned. A national lockdown took place in March 2020 in Egypt due to COVID-19, which has amplified the importance of women's psychological empowerment and the need for a work-life balance. In Egyptian culture, women are seen to be the unpaid caregivers of the house, and with being overworked without pay, this can only lead to detrimental effects to their overall mental, physical, and emotional health and well-being, which ties into our topic of choice. Egyptian working women also tolerated a disproportionate burden of the care economy by having to care for children, the elderly, and other household duties. Women have also faced increased risk of loss of employment and economic downturn and growing threats of violence and exploitation. There is an emphasis to be put on helping the women of society to lessen the burden of being needed in more than one place, because after all, there's only so much they can handle, and as studies have shown, there is a significant positive relationship between women's psychological empowerment and the perceived work-life balance as a whole. According to the ILO report of 2020, women make up almost 70% of the population, which also leads them to higher infection risk. Studies indicate that 37% of working women in Egypt crave to achieve a work-life balance post-COVID-19 recovery, followed by 16% of women who started to prefer working online for the remaining period of their career. Because of the outbreak, many organizations are implementing voluntary or perhaps mandatory work-from-home policies, and it is a challenge for women who are managing both personal and as well as professional life because of the pandemic. Doing all day-to-day activities at home, managing office work, taking care of kids and elder people, etc., can be really hectic tasks for women to do. Finally, empowerment practices have the potential to yield positive outcomes for both employees and workplaces through increasing employee participation in decision-making, delegating authority and control to these employees, creating more challenging work roles through job redesign, and leaders providing more coaching and mentoring to their staff.
As a consequence of the lockdown in Egypt, women who are subject to domestic violence normally are much more likely to suffer due to the longer duration that they spend at home. During this unprecedented time, women in Egypt are experiencing more cases of domestic violence than ever before. Lockdowns and restrictions are keeping women in unsafe home environments where they're unable to get the proper help that they need. Al-Shahab, which is a twice-funded UN Trust Fund grantee, works to provide essential services to these women to keep them safe during these times. This organization offers medical services, counseling, and legal help for these women. In a survey of 161 women, 82% reported an increase in violence against women, mostly in the home, but also in situations such as public transport, at work, and when accessing health services. The survey also identified other challenges that women are facing during this time, such as lack of support for children at home because of school closures, a reduced income and other challenges due to informal or irregular jobs, lack of virus protection equipment, and reduced access to psychosocial support. To address the outbreak of domestic violence associated with the COVID pandemic, Al-Shahab is working on providing psychological support through an online hotline and working with shelters to enable women and survivors of domestic violence to access safe spaces during the pandemic. In addition, Al-Shahab is distributing food and protective equipment to the community, and they are also raising awareness about the increased risk of domestic violence during this pandemic. The Al-Shahab staff is determined to do everything they can to protect the women they serve who are most at risk to domestic violence in Egypt during the pandemic.